Hi students, in this video we'll cover how to crack NMAT. NMAT is a very unique test and you have to prepare for it in a different manner compared to most of the exams that you will end up taking in your entrance test season, because it's a computer adaptive test and there is a little bit of complexity when it comes to marking scheme. There are of course some very good things about NMAT which I will be covering as part of the session today. So let's begin. Now, first things first, we'll be talking about some of the specific details of the NMAT and the application process. So first is it's a test which is conducted by GMAC. A lot of students think that NMAT is because the name is similar sounding with NMIMS. A lot of students think that it is conducted by NMIMS. That is not the case. NMIMS is just one of the accepting institutes and one of the best institutes that you can get through via your NMAT. So NMAT is administered by GMAC. Now you can take it a maximum of 3 times. So between the test window, and I'll cover those dates as well, between the test window, you can take it a maximum of 3 times. However, if you look at some of the institutions like NMIMS for example, they mention very clearly that they will accept only the first attempt of NMAT that you take. Now there's a mandatory gap of at least 15 days between your 2 attempts. So the first attempt that you take, after that if you want to retake it to better your score, you can always do that. But there has to be a minimum 15 days gap between the 2 attempts. Now it is conducted at test centers only. So at a point of time it used to be administered at home as well. So there was a home proctored attempt available, but that has been removed in the last couple of years and now it is conducted only at the test center. You can choose the order of the sections, which is very interesting and unique about NMAT, which allows students to play as per their strength. So if I like a particular section, I know I'm good at it, I have the option to either keep it in the beginning or I can keep it at the end depending on your test taking style. And the score is available immediately. So the moment you complete the test, so the test is done, immediately you'll be able to see your score. And within the next 48 hours, you also get the official test report in your dashboard. The registration for NMAT is different from the registration for the accepting institution. So as I mentioned, NMAT is a test and there are institutes that accept that particular test score. So when you fill the NMAT form, you are applying for NMAT, which is the test. In the same form, they also ask you to indicate the institutes where you want to send your score. That does not mean that you have applied to those institutes. You still have to complete step 2, which is essentially going to the respective institutes and applying to them. So NMAT and the institutions, these are two separate things and you will have to apply for NMAT and then apply for the individual institutes. Now important, NMIMS accepts only the first attempt of NMAT, as I mentioned some time back as well. So keep that in mind, and that is why whenever you decide to take the test, make sure that you are 100% prepared for the test. You don't have to rush and take it on day 1, for example. You can always take it in December as well. So if you look at the dates for this year, the registration will start from 20th August and this will continue till 10th October. So between this period, you have to register for NMAT, the test. Now scheduling, which is when you want to take the test, scheduling will start between 20th August to 22nd October. So during this period, you have to decide on which date you want to take the test. So on 20th August, for example, I can log in, I have completed my registration and now I can also book my attempt. So I may book it for a particular date which falls in this particular range, which is exam delivery start and exam delivery end, which is between 2nd November till 20th December. So I can take it in November if I want, I can take it in December also. It's better that you register early and book your slot. The reason for that is in the last couple of years, we have seen that slots are generally not available in abundance. They get filled very quickly and it may happen that you don't get a particular slot in a nearby location. So you may have to travel to say 100-200 kilometers just to take the test. So to avoid that, it is better that you book your exam slot as early as possible. They also open more slots, so it's not that only on day 1 all the slots will get exhausted. If at all the slots get exhausted for a particular city and a venue, they will open more slots for later point of time, but we exactly don't know when they will do that. That is why it's better to book a slot the moment you find a convenient slot. So if you see it that, okay, I'm going to take it in December, maybe on 5th December, I see a slot, it's in a nearby place, just book it, right? Don't wait. So that's about timeline. Of course, we'll have a detailed form filling guideline video in which I'll also cover the slot booking process. Okay, so we still have some time for that. Now let's talk about the NMAT test pattern. Now NMAT pattern hasn't changed in the last several years, so that's a very good thing that they have done. So students know what to expect. If you look at the test, it doesn't have any negative marking. However, the difficulty of the test keeps fluctuating depending on how you're performing, which means if I continue to get a couple of questions wrong, I'm going to get a set of questions which are going to be slightly easier because I'm not able to perform correctly at a certain level. So though there is no negative marking, the marking scheme is such that it factors in how you're performing on the test. Secondly, there is no on-screen calculator. So you will have to do calculations in your head on the paper. The rough sheet is given, so you get plenty of those, but you'll have to work on your calculation speed for sure. And finally, if you look at the cutoffs, so there is the sectional performance and then there is overall. So in some B schools, they just look at the overall score of the NMAT. In some B school, they look at the sectionals as well as the overall. NMIMS, for example, last year, 62 was the sectional minimum requirement and 209 for overall. That is for across all the campuses of NMIMS. Post that, of course, NMIMS has a separate application process. We'll talk about that when the actual application process begins. But for now, important thing to understand is the format of the test. So as I mentioned, you can decide the section order. Now in language, you have 36 questions, you get 28 minutes. In Quant, you have 36 questions and 52 minutes and the maximum time there. And LR, you have 36 questions and 40 minutes. So the total duration is 120. Now what you can always do, right, is, as I said, you can change the order. So if I want to, let's say, go in this order, I can do that. So when you begin the test, they have a demo in which they will also ask you to select the order. So you can, for example, say language quant logic or language logic quant and so on. So that is something that you can do. It's a very good thing in my view because a lot of times students, by the time they reach the end of the test, they tend to get tired. So they can strategize depending on their comfort level with the individual sections. And this is something that, so typically the order that I use, right, I'll talk about that. I generally start with quant because I like doing that. Followed by quant, I do LR and then I keep language for the end. Now the reason why I use this particular order, and again, I'm not saying everybody should do that. The reason why I do it is because in my view, keeping quant for the end, generally I tend to make more mistakes. So I get tired, and even in silly questions, simple questions, I'll make silly mistakes. I don't want to do that. I want to maximize score on QA. And that's why I typically start with QA, go to LR, and then do the language. Because even if I'm tired, I can read language and answer those questions confidently. But I can't say the same thing for my quant skills. Why I don't start with LR is because LR sometimes can be a little frustrating as well. You may have some really tricky puzzles, etc. And I don't want to have that sort of uncertainty. So this is a rationale that I use. Doesn't mean that you use the same rationale to crack your NMAT. So I would suggest that you try out different orders, and that's a very important thing in this whole discussion of how to crack NMAT is you try out different orders in the mock test that you take and see what order really works for you. So if you decide that, okay, this particular order works for me, you follow it for all the remaining tests. So the first 4 or 5 NMAT mocks that you take, you try and experiment with the order, and once you have decided a particular order, you stick to it. Now let's talk a little bit about the adaptive test. What is the implication of that? Now many students have this concern that what exactly is an adaptive test. So firstly, adaptive means that depending on how you're performing, it will start getting incrementally difficult or remain at same level or go down depending on the performance. Okay, so think of it as playing a game, for example. You clear a particular level, you go to the next level, and you will generally find that level to be slightly more advanced. Now, does that happen for each and every question? The answer is no. Now, there is no way to exactly know how things will evolve because the algorithm is something that they have never released. But if, let's say, I attempt and get, say, 3 to 4 questions correct, the next set of questions, I will see marginal increase in the difficulty of the questions. you will not experience it question by question. So I get a particular question, let's say difficulty 7 on 10. I answer it correctly. It's not that the next question will be 7.5 or 8 difficulty on 10. That's not how it works. But if I get, let's say, 2-3 questions of, let's say, level 7 correct, I might move on to the slightly higher level. If I get 1 or 2 questions wrong, I will go down a little bit in terms of the difficulty that I will get. So that is the understanding of adaptive test. So your score is not really the number of questions that you get right into something, right? That's not how it is. Because your score is dependent on the number of questions that you have got right. And also what matters is the difficulty of those questions. Okay? So the response of the question that you give determines the difficulty of the next set of questions. It could be 1, 2, or 3 next questions that you're going to get. You cannot skip a question. It's very, very important and unique about NMAT. You see a question at a time. Now, if you look at other exams like say CAT or say ZAT or whatever it is, you have the option of deciding which question you want to solve. So you will see a question palette on the right hand side typically, and you can click on a question, jump to it, and then solve it. But when it comes to NMAT, that is not the case. You see a question, you have to answer it, then only you can move on to the next question. Whether you got this right or wrong, that's a secondary thing, but only once you answer it, you move on to the next one. So you cannot skip a question, which also means that you cannot review a question. So if I've attempted a particular question and I go ahead, suddenly I realize that, okay, I made an error, I want to go back and fix it. There is no way you can do that. And lastly, one very important thing is you will be penalized if you leave out any answers or questions at the end. So this is something that they have mentioned, but the exact nature of penalty is not known to the public. So we don't know how bad the penalty is, but for sure, if you leave questions at the end, there's a penalty. Also, you might encounter or get lower score because you are attempting a lot of questions towards the end randomly. And that is why it's very, very important to pace yourself. So the pacing strategy is extremely important for NMAT. I think that's possibly the only test where you have to be very, very careful about looking at the timer and just understanding how many questions you still have left and adjust your pace. So in some cases, even when I have taken the test and I have taken, I think, the last 7 editions of NMAT, every single time I have encountered cases where I have randomly marked a particular question just to move on because the question felt very, very difficult. Of course, don't do it for a lot of questions, otherwise you might get a lower score. A couple of more things about the adaptive test. So firstly, answering higher level questions correctly will definitely yield a higher score. So the more difficult questions you get, potentially you're going to get a score on the higher side because I'm guessing a lot of you will also be getting those questions correct. One very important thing is, as I was talking about pacing, right, is don't go too slow in the beginning because it may happen that some of you may think that I have to get a lot of questions correct in the beginning, which will improve my level of questions that I'm going to get. But that is not necessarily the case. There have been cases where I've got a particular question wrong and the next question has turned out to be even more difficult than this question. So it's not truly adaptive question by question is what I would say. So don't go very, very slowly and cautious in the beginning. Pace yourself as well as you can. Right? So if you think of Quant, for example, you have 52 minutes, you have 36 questions. Roughly, that is 13 minutes for 9 questions. So as long as I'm maintaining that, and even if it goes plus minus 1 minute here and there, it's still okay. So I'll have to keep track of that and pace yourself in that manner. Rather than worrying too much in the beginning that let me go slow because you may not be able to complete the paper in that case. So manage your time very, very well. Don't go too fast because you might end up making unnecessary mistakes, and I've been there and done that where I've misread a particular question in a hurry, but that's how you learn as well. And one very important thing is don't try to gauge how you're doing on the test. A lot of students while they're taking the test, they try and think of the difficulty of the questions that they're getting. That's not your job, right? So you just have to attempt and answer correctly the questions that are given to you without worrying about how much you will score or how you're doing on the test. That is not going to help you. Now we'll talk about the individual sections and then I will talk more about the scoring mechanism and what resources you can use. But for now, let's go to the individual sections. So first is I'm going to start, as I mentioned, the order that I follow. So I'll start with the quant section. One very good thing about NMAT is that they have NMAT official guide, which defines what the syllabus of the test is. They're not going to ask you anything outside that. So unlike other exams where there is no syllabus that is mentioned, or even if it is mentioned, they are known to divert from it. But if you look at NMAT, whatever is there in the official guide, that's what they will ask you. Very, very important, NMAT does not have time, speed, distance in the official guide. And that is why they don't ask you questions from that. It does not have geometry. So no geometry questions. Now this might be a good news for some of you who don't like geometry. So you're going to have arithmetic, which is generally the dominant part of the section. You have modern maths, numbers, algebra, and you have data interpretation, which is typically bar chart, tables, and so on. Now this also includes, so the numbers that you see here also includes the data sufficiency questions. So data sufficiency is kind of, I would say, unique to NMAT because it is not asked in most of the other exams. In some, yes, but in most of the major exams, you don't see data sufficiency questions being asked. Typically, you can have 4, 5, 6, 7 data sufficiency questions, which is from these particular topics only. So you may have, for example, 3 questions of arithmetic, but given as data sufficiency questions. So in the last 3 years, we have seen arithmetic questions tend to be around 9 to 13 out of 36. The number will not remain fixed because for everybody that number can be different. Everybody gets a different set of questions. So if let's say I'm taking a test today and there's a person sitting next to me, we don't have the exact same questions. I will get a particular question depending on how I answer that question. The next question that I'm going to get will be very different compared to this particular person. And that is why the numbers can also change. The difficulty obviously will change. Arithmetic, what are the things that are asked? So they typically focus on simple interest and compound interest, percentages, time and work, ratio proportion, and all of these things, right? So 9 to 13 questions is what you can typically expect from this. Second is modern maths, and this is one area that typically is on the higher difficulty side. So whatever questions that you see generally from progressions or probability, they tend to be slightly higher difficulty compared to, let's say, some of the basic percentages or time and work question that you will get. In this, you will also have permutation, combination, set theory, logarithms, and you have to study this if you want to crack the QA section of NMAT. You cannot say, okay, I'll just do arithmetic and that will be the end of it. You will have to focus on modern maths. Numbers, not too many questions, 2 to 3 questions is what you can see. And even on algebra, which is typically quadratic equations and algebraic formulae, 2 to 3 questions is what you can expect. DI, you have to be good at it, and considering there is no calculator given, you have to be good at approximation. So work on that. So your bar charts, tables, line graphs, pie charts, and all of those things, you will have to work on that. So if you do arithmetic, data interpretation is sorted, which means focus on arithmetic, which will take care of, I would say, roughly about 17 to 20 questions, which is about half of the paper. And then definitely work on your modern math skills. Okay, so if you do this much, you are sorted for the QA section. But ultimately, the kind of difficulty that you will experience will depend on how you're performing on the test. All right, now let's move to the next area, which is logical reasoning. LR is interesting when it comes to NMAT. So there are some questions that you can easily clear in about 30 seconds, but you will also encounter questions that might take about 1.5 minutes as well. The two broad areas within LR is firstly verbal reasoning, which is metrics or linear arrangements, sequential output, and some standalone puzzle questions like logical puzzles and numerical puzzles. Now, if you look at the number of questions that have been asked in the past, in couple of years, people got 2 sets of sequential output, and this is not common. For some people it happened, for some people it didn't happen. So you can have about 12 questions. If you look at 23 and 25, in both the years, 12 questions of the verbal reasoning and the non-verbal reasoning, and then verbal reasoning. That's my bad. Apologies for that. So that should be non-verbal reasoning. The verbal reasoning component, if you look at 23, 24, 25, again, the distribution is more or less the same. But here you have what kind of questions? So implicit statements, which is assumptions, strong argument, weak argument, and typically they give you one small paragraph. So it's about 4 or 5 sentences, and you have to decide from the options which one will strengthen or weaken the argument. Then you have questions on course of action. So this particular thing that has happened, what let's say you as a person in charge of that should do. Not too many questions. So if you see, course of action, you see a lot of questions, but not too many for the strong and the weak argument question. Then fact and statement analysis. So 1 or 2 questions is what you can get. And critical reasoning, strengthening, weakening, assumption, inference, conclusion. So all of that kind of put together is 8 to 10 questions typically. So a very big chunk is critical reasoning. You have to work on that. So whether it is assumption, inference, conclusion, strengthening, weakening, arguments, and all of these things, work on this aspect a lot. And finally, syllogism. So syllogisms in NMAT, I haven't seen very difficult questions being asked. So if you practice the stuff that is at the level which is given in the official guide, and if you take your mocks, you should be good to go. Typically, 1 to 3 questions is what you can get from syllogism. So the exact number, don't get fixated with that. The numbers can change, but these are the question types that you need to prepare for. You cannot go to NMAT and without having practiced, let's say, critical reasoning, right? You're going to suffer badly. So practice a lot of questions of these individual types. It will not take you too much time to do that. And I would say NMAT preparation in general will not take a lot of time, especially for the LR section. Quant definitely will take some time, and same is the case for the verbal section as well. And that brings us to the last section, which is language skills. Now, with respect to language, this is one area on NMAT that most students come out of the test and say, okay, we had a good time. A lot of students are also able to finish it before the given time limit. The reason for that is most questions are direct. So if you look at the big component, which is the RC, you have 4 questions on each passage. Now, in the last couple of years, we have seen 3 RCs being asked instead of 2 RCs. So if you read an RC, you can straight away take care of 4 questions, correct? And that is why people, and of course you have to attempt every question, so you will end up attempting it. Now, whether to read the questions first or the RC first and all of that, it's something that you need to try in your mocks. But most of you will be able to complete this section fairly comfortably, because all these other questions, a lot of them are one-liners. If you look at parajumbles, of course 4 or 5 sentences, so not too complicated, but 4 to 5 questions or 4 to 6 questions is what you can expect from this. Analogies, consistently they have been asking 5 questions, and if you have good vocab, analogies questions will become easy for you. Fill in the blanks, vocab based, these are all one-liners, right? So this you should be able to handle in about 10 to 15 seconds. If you know the word, you get it right. You don't know the word, you still have to mark something and move on. Then you have fill in the blanks, which are preposition based. This is one segment which is considered to be very, very simple and straightforward. I haven't seen students coming out and saying, okay, I found it tough to answer fill in the blanks questions based on prepositions. Spot the error in underlined part. So the grammar part is very important, and sentence completion. So if you look at grammar, 5 to 6 questions is what will be asked, and that's a significant number, I would say. So the 3 things that you need to work on when it comes to NMAT, the language skill section, is your RC skills, the second is going to be grammar, and the third is going to be vocab. If you take care of these 3 things, others will fall in place, because if you think of parajumbles, it's nothing but comprehension. So if you can do RCs well, there's a very good chance that you will be able to do your PJs well as well, the paragraph jumbles. And if you know your grammar, then spotting the error becomes easy. If you know vocab, analogies, fill in the blanks, vocab based and preposition based, all of that also becomes very easy, right? So focus on these 3 areas. It will really help you to crack NMAT. And that brings us to the last overall prep strategy discussion, and then we'll talk about the resources to use. Firstly, how to prepare for NMAT, right? Now, there are broadly, I would say, 2 to 3 types of aspirants. So one is somebody who is taking CAT, somebody who is thinking only of NMAT, and somebody who is thinking of both, right? So if you are somebody who is thinking of only CAT, I would say NMAT is a good addition, because it will create some opportunities for you. So those of you who started your MBA preparation with the mindset that I'm going to only take CAT, I would say give NMAT a consideration. Those of you who are already decided that, okay, I'm going to take CAT and NMAT both, you already started preparation for CAT. There's very limited stuff that you will have to do to be in shape to take the NMAT. I will talk about what those things are. We already discussed most of it, but as you must have noticed, some of the things are not typically asked on the CAT. So if you think of grammar, vocab, which is not explicitly asked in the CAT, You think of the logical puzzles. The kind of puzzles that you will get on the NMAT, they will not appear on the CAT. So you will still have to do a little bit of additional stuff. Think of, say, input output, right, which is the sequential output question type. So focus on those areas. And that is why we have a lot of resources within IMS, within MyIMS that you can use, which will help you to practice these kind of questions. So focus on those areas and they are not very lengthy. So if you think of, say, input output, it won't take you a lot of time to get better at it. Test taking is the most important part, and with NMAT, I can't emphasize more on that. Very, very crucial, because you have to get used to that pacing. That pacing strategy is very, very important. Section order is going to be important. If you get stuck, at what point you decide that, okay, I'm going to randomly mark something and move on. So there have been years where I have completely random marked one DI caselet entirely because it was too lengthy. I of course suffered because of that as well. But in any of the years, in the last 7 years, I haven't fallen below 270. So the strategy that I use for myself, it has worked for me. You have to try out your strategy, and test taking is the best way to get better at it. Do not spend too much time on a question. So random marking couple of questions is what you may have to do. Do intelligent guesswork. Calculated guessing is something that you have to master. It's a test of speed, so it will reward people who are naturally fast. But don't think that if you're currently not able to solve a lot of questions, don't think that you'll never be able to reach that number. There have been years where I have struggled. I have not been able to attempt 1 or 2 questions in a particular section, but there have been years when I have completed a particular section with 2 minutes to go as well. So it depends, right? It's not something that every time you will be able to do extremely well, but as long as you find balance in your attempt, you should be fine. And finally, one very important thing, whatever your CAT mock scores are at this point of time, this does not have any impact on your NMAT performance. I have seen students getting 70, 80 percentile in the actual CAT, moving up to a very, very high score on the NMAT. So your CAT mock scores, they will not decide what kind of performance you will have on the NMAT. So don't try and correlate them. NMAT is a completely different test. It's a very unique test. And there will be people who will do extremely well on the NMAT, but might not be able to replicate the same performance on the CAT. And vice versa can also happen. The next thing that I will talk about as we come to the end of this particular video is the resources. Now, when you register for NMAT, one good thing that they do is they give you some free practice as well. So please make use of that. If they also have paid resources, but I would not suggest everybody should go for that. Because if you're already enrolled with IMS, you will have most of the things that you need, and I don't think you need to go for the paid resources. However, if you think that you want to have more NMAT level practice, the official mocks that they provide, that's a very good addition, I would say. For those of you who are very, very serious about your NMAT and NMIMS, can possibly look at it. But again, you can decide at a later point of time as well. You don't have to take that call today. Speaking of IMS resources, first is for the CAT students, Module 5 is something that you should begin with because it contains some of these topics that you will see on NMAT and other exams as well. For the students who are enrolled with us for SNAP, NMAT, CET kind of programs, the courseware itself takes care of NMAT prep. So that's what you will focus on. ADMAT practice, including ADMAT Maximizer, is available in your candidate dashboard. So you can have a look at that. And similarly, ADMAT masterclasses, which are 20 masterclasses with video solutions. So have a look at them as well. Speaking of grammar, you have the prepare module section in which you have grammar module. So that's one place where you can find grammar related content. And finally, we're going to have 10 full length mocks. Now we have not yet released them. We'll be releasing them in a sequential manner starting next month. With respect to mock, I would say if you're planning to take, let's say, your NMAT in November, you try and space out your mocks. So maybe take a couple of them in September, a few in October, and then maybe 3 or 4 closer to your exam date. If you're planning to take NMAT in December, even in that case, I would suggest that you take maybe 1 or 2 mocks either in September or October, 1 or 2 in November, and then remaining in December, just so that you are in touch with the test format. If you have any questions about NMAT, please let me know. As I mentioned, I've taken it, I've been following it for a very long time now, And I've also documented some of my experiences of taking the test on a blog that I maintain for IMS. I will give a link in the description from where you can check it out. So have a look at that. I think till NMAT 23, I have written about every single experience that I had. I didn't do it for NMAT 24 and 25 because nothing had changed. So honestly, there wasn't much to add after 23. The prep experience and all of that was more or less the same. By the way, I generally don't prepare, but I make sure that I take the free official mock that they give because it's a very good, it's the exact same interface. So it's always better to have a look at that before you go for the actual test. But the score that you get there, don't try to think too much about that. The actual score might be lower than it or might be more, right? So you never know. In most years, I've got a lower score compared to the official mock that is there. But anyway, you will find those experiences in the link that I will give in the description. Check it out, and if you have any other questions about NMAT or its preparation or B schools, etc., please let me know. I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll have NMAT and NMIMS detailed form filling guideline video coming up. So have a look at that as well before you fill your NMAT form. Thank you so much for watching. Wish all of you all the best, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Take care.